everyone. This is a Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Younger, your host. Employee experience is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing of some of their imperfections that we realize their brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself in the stories my guests tell about times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a place of deeper connection with their teams and heightened leadership prowess. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. This is Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast, and today I am super excited to have someone who I consider a friend and a colleague. I've known him for quite some time now. Andy Boian's on the podcast with us, and he is someone I met him a while back, and then I've watched from afar, and I really appreciated his leadership style, the poise at which he does lead, and then the focus that he has on people that he does lead. And so that's why you're on, Andy. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Heather. I'm glad to be here and honored to be before you and everybody.
So where are you right now in your leadership journey anyway?
I have led this company I have for the last 15 years, but I have managed groups of people and both large and small for the past 25 years or so. So when I left graduate school and went into the professional sector, I was teaching at night and working during the day. And my superiors at times saw some leadership qualities in me that they identified early on as something they'd like to both coach me to work on and to be stronger in, but also unique sort of for a middle 20-year-old guy to have some insight into how things, in terms of how things land on people and how to treat someone that works with you, not for you, but with you as an equal, and have them, have the same kind of feelings of authority over what they do and how they act and how they practice. And so I've always worked hard and continue to today, Heather, to answer your question, to make sure that those that work with me in professional capacities and in nonprofit capacities, et cetera, always feel valued. They always feel like their interests and their alignment of responsibility in the community is valued. And that's something that I think is fairly rare. So along my leadership journey now, I'm refining the process of, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I had no intention of having my own company and running this size of company particularly, but more about people were drawn and I was drawn to this common goal that we have at our firm and how we manage those goals. And so we hire people that are similar in nature and also will fit into cultures that are constantly evolving and changing depending on the environment.
Love it. There's so much thoughtfulness into how you've built this up. Because again, I've watched it over the years. So, and I think that thoughtfulness of kind of picking the right people to put in the right places that enrich the culture that you have, that then help to perpetuate the image and even the perception of clients and the community about your organization. And it's authentic, right? It's not just, I know you're a PR firm, but so it's not just about image, but in the end, we do want to make sure our brand and how we act inside and outside of our brand, it aligns. And I know you've been real thoughtful about that. So, and that's a lesson I think for all of us, no matter how big of an organization that we lead, thinking through that, the values that are on the letterhead, that are on the wall, that are on wherever, do our actions and how we are perceived by people in and out of the organization, do they align? It's just something to be considering, right?
It's so true, Heather. And I like you have said, I've watched you as well, and I've admired you for a long time. And I remember having conversations with you about leadership and how employee loyalty is important, but it has to be earned. Employee loyalty is not something that necessarily just comes with day one on the job, and so now I'm loyal to, ABC company. What really has to be a part of the process is gaining that trust, gaining that respect by giving it. The first thing we do right away is we do a work plan at what's called the 60-day quick start plan, where we go through with the new employee what his or her aspirations are for the next 60 days, not what their job description says, not what we are expecting as a company, but what are their aspirations? And then, we meet in 60 days, and have we fulfilled those? Have we been a part together in having those achieved? And yes, I am the CEO. I'm the one who writes the checks, and I'm the one who, does the negotiations, et cetera. But I find myself more and more as a part of a team, and not really somebody who is an authority over anyone, but is and gives the authority with others. And I use the word "with" a lot. I use the word, I'm not your boss, I'm your colleague. I think the boss subordinate relationship is backwards. And I think it doesn't make any sense. The top-down stuff doesn't make any sense to me. It never has. And I'll tell you, this comes from working in business, but also I have a long background in politics and in political campaigns. And I can tell you, when you work with a candidate who has his or her total faith in what you're saying, if you are giving mixed messages from staff to the candidate to the media to the eventual voter, then you haven't done your job. In fact, you've done it exactly the opposite. You've screwed it up. And so I find myself I find myself as the CEO in rooms full of people that work at our firm. I often don't speak until the end. And I don't think that leaders necessarily, some of the best leaders I know, speak last. So let's say we have a strategy meeting on a topic, or we're dealing with a difficult client, and we all have come together as a team to talk about how to manage this situation. If I speak first, it defeats the purpose. And the reason I speak last, two reasons why I speak last. One is I gain people's perspective without having to say anything. So people get to voice what they want to voice. They feel comfortable without any caveat saying what they want to say. And I get the benefit of listening to that before I speak, which is enormously helpful all the time, even if I don't necessarily agree, or if I think something different, or, if it goes long, I still listen. And the second reason I do it, Heather, is because I think when it is my turn to speak, I want to speak with everybody's thoughts in mind. And if I come in with an agenda, I'm not leading. If I come in with this, this is the way it's going to go, and I'll listen to what you have to say, but I've already made my decision. Generally, that's not the way to lead. And so if I do it exactly the opposite, which I'm known to do, people say, what's your opinion on this? It's done so with everybody's communication in place already. People have said what they've wanted to say. They have been willing to open themselves up. And then secondly, I've only spoken after I've had the chance to garner all those opinions and then take those into account when determining what technically the CEO says at the very end.
Well, yeah, I think you've given like this right here is great, because it's kind of a roadmap for people to listen to and to live by. So I love the idea of the 60-day kickstart. You call it, right? Kickstart program.
60-day quick start is what we call it, and it's basically to give the team member assurance that we have their back, and that we aren't expecting. When you start a new job, typically people think, oh my gosh, I got to make sure and impress the boss, or I have to make sure and do certain reports by a certain time, or go see a certain number of clients by a certain time. And if it's all written down on paper and we talk about it and agree to it and say, here's where I think your best lessons to thrive are, then there's no worry. There's no concern. There just is a very clear indication of how to succeed. And that's what we both have agreed to.
So it reminds me of, it's not quite it, but there's kind of associated with something called The Alliance by Reid Hoffman. He's the
Sure.
founder of LinkedIn. Have you ever read that? I don't know if you have, but
I have.
and so he kind of talks about this idea in the beginning of having, I think he calls it a tour of duty, and that is you come in and you're and up front you're agreeing, okay, I think I want to stay for 8 months. I want to stay for a year. Okay, so this is kind of a little bit different iteration of what you're talking about, but they have this agreement. And then what they do is they have a cadence where they meet pretty frequently to say, okay, are we still at that 8-month mark? Are you achieving what you need to achieve internally? Are we getting kind of the full value from having you here? So you keep touching base to have like a meeting of the minds on how are we meeting each other's needs and where are we at? And are you still kind of loyal, I guess, for the short period of time you're here? Are you still committed to those initial things? So I like that idea of that quick start because it sets the expectations right up front. And then when you check back in, you can kind of reiterate or iterate, I guess, as you go to change what it is you need to for them to want to keep going in the same way for you.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think in my years of managing people and being around other leaders, I have yet to find a leader who has said, yep, on day one, I nailed exactly what I wanted the employee to do. It's a perfect fit. And he or she is right in line with what I expected. That doesn't happen. And also conversely, and I think even more importantly, the employee says, well, it's a great job so far and I really like what I do, but it's a little different than what I thought. Or I'm worried that he's or she isn't satisfied yet. Or, do I stay in as long as the boss stays in the office? Do I have to stay, kind of thing and not leave till he or she leaves? Those kinds of things are always so full of angst and don't need to be because we're human beings. And the reality is one of us has to lead. One of us has to be the leader. And I really take that seriously, but I also really value and really want to know the input and the value of everyone around the table.
I also like the example that you show of really, it's what we call psychological safety. So it's this idea of if you are especially as a CEO, if you're the person who's the last to speak, and so then you're giving everybody else permission to speak first, they feel more comfortable. They know there's an open, safe space to be able to have those conversations. And you were opening that up by not speaking first, then speaking last. I think it's intelligent on your part to evaluate all of what you hear. And I've seen this in action, so I know you do this. Evaluate all of what you hear and then land on wherever you need to land, given that you might have a different global view of things, but you want to make sure you're not leaving out the other voices that are there. And so there's a lot of emotional intelligence in what you described in that regard. And also this idea of psychological safety, making sure that you have that there for your team. So I appreciate that you bring that.
I love that term, psychological safety. I really think that's exactly what it is, and it makes people feel better. It also, from a recruitment and retention standpoint, it's important for us too because we put a lot of effort and time into people that come to work for us and with us up front. And so, if they feel immediately valued, immediately listened to, immediately considered, then they're going to tend to want to stay. And in our business, Heather, we are a business of relationships. We're not, yes, we are a public relations firm. Yes, we deal with the media. Yes, there's a certain amount of work that we do every day talking to the public, but it's so big, so much more than that. It is about the relationship, especially right now, this pandemic we're going through, where clients are relying on us for things that aren't written down in our scope. And they're saying, what do we do about, furloughing employees? And what do we do about conversations you have to have with people that may have to leave? And those kinds of things come up if they trust you. And I'll go back, if I may, for just a second to your topic, which is doing it with heart. And that is, I will very easily tip over into getting emotional about this because it's a critical part to me of how you treat somebody respectfully. Is when you do it with heart, when you do it not just not go through the motions, not do just the responsibility of, just have the responsibility of maintaining a relationship with them, but doing so with an understanding of what they want and what they need, and the fact that you're compassionate, you're empathetic, you understand their situation, and you are embracing it. At our firm, for example, Heather, we have unlimited PTO, and people look at me and say, what? I mean, they can take as much vacation as they want. And the reality is first of all, statistically, it's true. People take less vacation actually when they have a limited PTO, but that wasn't the point. The point is that you're in control of this. You have the ability to decide for yourself how you want to survive, not only the process, but also how you want to really truly thrive. So I say survive and then thrive. So day one, you're surviving because you're getting to know the lay of the land. But hopefully on day 10 or day 15 or day 25, you are thriving already, surviving and thriving.
So where does your drive to lead come from? Because I've found out it's about a handful of kind of reasons why people decide to lead.
Yeah.
What would be yours?
So I'll be, if I may, without going too far deep into it for purpose of the time, but my mother left us when I was 11, and my father was a traveling salesman, and so I was alone a lot with my younger brother, and we learned how to take care of one another and how to thrive. What would be today considered, potential abandonment. And I have good parents. They just were making decisions at an early age for me that were different. But I learned right away how to make do with what I had. And then I began this I went through a feeling of fight or flight. As I went through high school, went through college, went through graduate school, and into the world, I thought I either have to fight my way through this to make sure that I'm protected and safe, or I have to go. I have to leave. And that was the way that I assumed it worked for a long time, until I realized, and until I became mature enough to understand, my ability to affect change is done through being a leader. And it's saying we can do this. So I can't tell you how many times I've said to people about this, this epidemic, that's a pandemic that's going through the world right now. But I've said to people, we're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And we're going to get through it. And it's almost a feeling of wanting to hear that from anybody, to say, boy, I've heard about some more of this or some more of that. And reality is, yes, it is devastating. Yes, it is a situation, but it's also something we're going to survive. And so that my natural instinct comes from my childhood, which was an unusual childhood from that perspective. And then two, I will tell you, I'm a father, and I view fatherhood as the most important thing in the world to impressionable young boys right now who are looking at me and saying, I want to either be like him or I want to pick up some things from him, and I'm not sure how to do it. And we're leading through some things. So I teach my son, my 13-year-old, I'm teaching my son how to take care of himself physically, how his body's changing, and how he ought to be thinking about different things as he takes care of himself. And I teach my 10-year-old boy how to reasonably resolve a conflict in his fourth grade class with another classmate. Those kinds of things, if you are a part of that process and you're leading by example, I find that's my most comfortable place. I have a very tough time. I'll be honest with you, Heather. It's a fault of mine, but I have a very difficult time being led by somebody with whom I don't understand or respect or empathize. I don't do well in those situations, and so yeah, it leads to some changes in structure sometimes for me, but it also leads to a great opportunity to both lead and then also to learn, and I learn a lot every day.
Well, I mean, thank you for all that. That was amazing. And I didn't know that about you. So look at that. I didn't know. And that we both have like similar adversities as children, and how that has impacted our desire to lead. And like you said, the leadership is about having impact and touching lives and empowering others. And then of course, being parents. I mean, the role that we play in that, it is so critical. It is, like you said, the most important thing. And they are always watching. They're always watching. They were always watching. And mine, as they get older, they'll call me on stuff and say, well, Mom, you just did that thing.
Yep. And me too.
You're right.
Me too. Yeah.
And that was not right.
Yeah, exactly. My 10-year-old said to me the other day, he said, Dad, you're better than this. And I was frustrated by a process. And my 10-year-old said to me, "Dad, you're better than this," and he was right. And it's a humbling moment. But what that is, Heather, for me, is that's actually feeling leadership. That's feeling like, you know what, I've led him into a spot where he feels comfortable to say, "Dad, come on, I spilled this. There's no reason to get frustrated." Or I got this grade. Or while my 10-year-old is 10, he's very much a 10-year-old, but he also has incredible insight into me. And I can't emphasize enough how valuable it is. How valuable it is, because it transits into all parts of it. Transits into my marriage. It transits into the way I run my business. It translates into how I treat my neighbors. It's everything. It permeates everywhere. Everywhere. The adage about, you want to be treated the way, obviously, that you treat others. And I intentionally flip it around like that, because I say, if you're empathetic enough to understand, if you lead first with grace, 9 times out of 10, they will give you grace back. There is grace there. So my wife is a 2nd grade school teacher, and sometimes she struggles with patience with her 2nd graders. And we talk about leading with grace. And when you lead with grace, it typically comes back 2 or 3 or 4-fold, and it works. And, Heather, there are those every once in a while that it just doesn't, no matter what you do, it doesn't work. But I've watched you both as a parent and as a professional for years as well. And I know what kind of parent you are, even though I haven't seen it in action very much. I can tell what kind of parent you are. And it's done by the way you lead and how you show others empathy. I think that's critical.
Empathy is critical. And it's interesting because I see how I have 4 kids, and it's amazing how they're all so different and how much they lead me. I follow them in so many ways because they are just brilliant beyond their years. And so my daughter, who has had kind of quite a bit of adversity in her life as a kid, special needs and issues of her heart and all kinds of stuff, has had a struggle. And that journey has just informed so much of just how I show up, because I've had to initially, help her through all that. But to see how just self-driven she is, how much she wants to fight, to just fight to get ahead. She wants to continue to, forge forward. And it's just crazy to see. And I think, wow, I've never seen anybody more driven than me. And she's way more, she's like 5 levels above me. I'm like, wow, you're scary, girl. But because of that, because I see that stick-with-itness, and it helps me too. So I feel real blessed to be led by my children as well. It's pretty cool.
I got to tell you, that's pretty impressive too, to hear from you that, you learn from your children, because I do too. And it's interesting when my 10-year-old said, "Dad, you're better than that." It shocked me, because I've had people say that to me before, like, "Hey, look at this a different way," or "Think about it this way," or those kind of things. But for my 10-year-old to sit at the kitchen table during dinner and say, "Dad, come on,"
that's pretty amazing. That had to hit you at a core.
Yeah, it was really amazing. But it was all heart. It was, he feels safe, he feels comfortable, and he feels like he'll be heard. And that's what leadership is all about. If you provide that, or if you provide an environment for that, more appropriately, then you'll find this, 10, 12, 4-fold, 20-fold over, because you'll find in the professional life, you'll have employees that will stick with you forever. But in personal life, you have kids that are growing up that are resilient, that are confident, but they're also respectful, and they too lead with heart. They too enter in relationships with grace. And that's what I want for them. That's what I want for everybody whom I interact.
I love that. I like the spin, because sometimes I always have a weird feeling when I end up inputting or inserting my children into, let's say, my written work or in my videos. I do a lot of videos, or the written stuff has my kids in there. I have no choice. I have 4 kids. They're in my life. And there's so much that I learn from them from a leadership perspective. So I feel like I need to put it out there. But sometimes I'm like, people think this is weird, because I'm always talking about leadership in my children, and mostly them leading me, not the other way around. But I think what I think the key thing there is that people are always watching us, and that you don't have to have a title to be leading someone. And it's how we influence people, and how we, whether we're leading with or not, with example, and a good example, and we get to choose it. And I think that's what I always try to tell the kids too. It's like, if they, they're in a place where they feel like they're in a rut, or something that had happened to them that they didn't like. And I'm like, that happened. And you can't control that, but you can control how you respond to it. The key is that we have a choice. And when people know that you have a choice in the matter of how you show up, I feel like it's super liberating. It's really empowering to people to know that they have that choice,
Totally, completely. And that's so true. And it's empowering, but it also gives them the ability to trust you. And over my office doors on the inside of our office, it says community, partnership, and integrity. And I ask everybody who works with us to say those three words to themselves every time they leave the office for a meeting, for a gathering, even at the end of the day. I say, just think about those words and think about what that means, because that's what we're based on. We're based on this idea that, if all of this shows up in how we act through our community, in partnership with people and things, and with integrity, with humility, with transparency and honesty, it always works out the way it's supposed to. It always does. And leaders, oftentimes CEOs of companies, like you've said, earlier, you can be a CEO of a great big multi-billion-dollar, Fortune 100 company, and treat your folks poorly, and there will be high turnover. There won't be transparency and honesty, and also there'll be a lot of mistrust. Or you can choose to run it in such a way that gives them the power and the authority and the willingness to use it. So I had a job, Heather, and when I was in college, I worked for a restaurant company that is still around today, and they empowered us through a program to basically discount or give away food if it wasn't right for whatever reason. Didn't have to go to a manager to say, can you write this off, or the pizza came out cold, or they asked for anchovies and I forgot to put them on there, or whatever. The company actually gave us the power to literally go in to the register and change the order so that they weren't billed for it. And I learned a lot from that. I was, in high school and college, and learning that empowerment to write off a $20 pizza while the company, lost out the money on it. They trusted us to make those decisions. And I really learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from that.
Oh, that's invaluable. It's really invaluable. Well, I'm curious. So this is like the most important part of this show. It's really the most interesting, I think, for me, and I'm hoping for those who listen, for you to recount a time when you were not the best version of you, where you were not kind of this amazing, enlightened leader you are today. And I know that doesn't mean you're perfect, but you are pretty darn amazing. So, but recall a time, for us when you maybe weren't so great. And what did you do to come out of that and become more enlightened?
Sure. Great question. And there are lots of examples when I don't feel like I did my best. So when I first started this company, the concern I had about how we were going to survive as a company was based on finances. It was, look, if we have enough money to pay the bills, if we have enough money to make payroll and make rent, then we're going to be fine. And so I constantly was concerned about billing and following up and ensuring that clients signed the contract and that things were handled in such a way that was very transactional. And so I find myself sometimes, and I did recently, I got caught up with a company client of ours that's behind in their billing, and they're having trouble making the bills, and they agreed to pay it, but they just are struggling right now. And so I said to the team that was on it, the internal team that was on the client, I said, let's stop work until they pay the bill. And one employee stood up and said, take what they owe out of my paycheck. If it's about money, if we're gonna slow down this process and not serve them until they pay us, I don't agree with that. And so take it out of my paycheck, and you can reimburse me when they pay us, because they'll pay us. And I thought to myself, what an unbelievably, it's like my 10-year-old saying, you're better than that. It's another one of those times in my life when I look back and I thought, wow, I just learned something here that from a colleague that I would have never picked up on, because I was so squarely focused on getting the bills in, once the bills are in, pay the bills, and, the transaction happens. But it's much more, it's a long-standing relationship with this client. The client was hit with hard times, and so they're paying it in parts, and they aren't paying it the way they agreed. So instead of react compassionately and empathetically, I reacted very transactionally, because I go to bed at night, Heather, having to make payroll every 2 weeks. And I go to bed thinking about insurance and rent. And, with all due respect to all the members of the team, those are on my shoulders. Those consider my shoulders. And this person said, take it out of my check. And this is a father. This is a father who's married with children, who's a single head of household. His wife doesn't work. And I thought, he's got the right idea. He is where I need to be. Checks came in, bill was paid. I don't take anything from employees, so I didn't take it from him, but I just relaxed and I trusted and I empathized and I concerned myself with what was most important. And that was the relationship. And if I could take that back, Heather, if I could rework that again, I would have reacted a different way. The client is still a client. They love us. They had no idea that I said that because I relaxed about it and they ended up paying the bill in full. But I certainly wished I would have approached it with the team differently. And so I got a message from one of the team members that was in the meeting when I said that, and she said, "Is this really we call it a 911? Is this really a 911 right now? The money they owe us, or is this something that we should be thinking about and keeping in mind and keeping track of what they owe us, et cetera? But is it really the top thing we should be concerned about?" And it's a way in which I learn, and I learn every single day from these brilliant people about how to do this. And that's where I took a big scoop of, I call it a big scoop of ice cream of learning, because I consider it kind of like when you scoop out ice cream. When you scoop that out, you learn every single time something new. And that day I got a big scoop of learning, and it was a big deal for me. So,
wow, that's amazing. Oh, thanks for sharing that. I mean, when we talk about loyalty and somebody's willing to give away their paycheck to make sure that the customer's needs are met, like, you will never want that person to leave. So you will do whatever you need to keep that person, because if that person, they're putting their neck on the line for your business. You're right. And it's just interesting, because that perspective of, my neck's in the line to pay for payroll and all these things. And this person's like, no, my neck's in the line too, to make sure that this client's needs are met. I just think it's amazing.
Yeah.
But that's what being, I mean, again, it gave back to you because of all the trust and everything else that you've built, and the safety to have that conversation. Because I mean, how many times does that conversation not happen in the corporate world, where people see something's not right, the values aren't aligned, and they say nothing because there's too much fear.
That's right. Or you do go after the client and you say, you owe me X dollars, and if you don't pay by a certain time, we're going to cut you off. And they think, okay, I'll figure out a way to pay you, and then I never want to do business with you again. Yeah. Because or I don't trust you the way I thought I trusted you. You surprised me. And oftentimes when we go back and rethink about how to do something, and you learn from it, like I learned from it in that scenario, I think, boy, that was a learning experience, because of not only the way I reacted to it, but the way my first instinct was to say, let's stop working until they pay us. That was not the right instinct. And we don't do business that way, actually. But my competing feeling about it all, being the leader, being the CEO, being the one who is the one responsible, was to say, by gosh, we don't have the money in the door like they said they'd give it to us. So let's just stop the bleeding now. And it was the wrong decision. And it ended up working out because, again, as I said earlier, once I heard that, I kept my mouth shut and listened to the conversation. And I was the last one to speak. And I said, you're right. We're going to do it this way. We're going to back off, and we're going to concentrate on what's important. And yet another reason why the CEO should always speak last.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it. Okay. So for those who are listening, who may be kind of at a crossroads in their leadership, they need some extra motivation to get through this time. I mean, we're in the coronavirus. It's nuts right now. Everything is just crazy. We're all remote. What might be some words of wisdom or pearls of wisdom you might leave them with today?
Yep. I would say two things. I would say, trust yourself and trust your ability to know what you're capable of, and know that there are no boundaries on how to work things out. There are no boundaries. And in a perfect world, this wouldn't have happened, but it's happening, and we all are together in this. So that's the first thing I'd say, is we're all together. Figure out ways in which, whether it's to reach out to somebody, whether it's to think about what else you can do to occupy your staff's time, or what you can be doing for clients that are extracurricular to your scope. think about ways you can provide value. And the second thing I'd say, which it might sound odd, is to be compassionate to yourself. And because the other thing we do in times like this is we are very hard on ourselves. We tend to look at these situations as, oh my gosh, this is so dire, I've got to do X, Y, Z. It's unfortunately, it's when suicide rates go up. I'm a huge advocate for the prevention of child abuse. April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, and kids take it out. I mean, parents take it out on their kids, and through the work that I've been a part of, and others, we've been able to coach parents on in times of dire situations, like some may be really in tough situations right now, to remember to be empathetic and be compassionate with yourself. And that will not only help you, but it will also, at the end of the day, provide a lot of room to be patient and kind, and therefore translate that into others. Going back to what we said earlier about you treat people the way you want to be treated and vice versa. If you do that, if you do those two things, if you trust the process and trust that we're all in it together, and two, you're empathetic and kind to yourself, then things work out. And that's a really important part of it. And you lead with heart.
I love that. So for those who are listening, if you found great value, as I have, I've been writing like a crazy woman right now, please do share this far and wide. And then when we do that, obviously we get people who maybe really need to hear the messages, hopefully listening to those messages. And also don't forget to go on to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and write a review, because again, there are many leadership podcasts. I do think this one is unique and different because we are sharing not just the best of leaders, but sometimes not the best of leaders and what they do and the solutions to come out of it. And then this is where the learning comes from. So thanks so much for listening. And Andy, thank you so much for joining. I mean, this has been really fruitful, and I'm glad I listened to my gut on this.
Thank you too. I'm really very honored to be here. Thank you again, Heather.
Thank you, everybody, for joining the Leadership with Heart podcast, and have a great one.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.